Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to The Print. My name is Fatima Khan and joining me today is Senior Congress Leader and Member of Parliament Manish Tiwari. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much.
Now, the Lok Sabha adjourned today indefinitely and with it concluded what was a rather stormy monsoon session. Om Birla, who is the Speaker of Lok Sabha, he said that he's very pained with how the Lok Sabha wasn't allowed to run smoothly, and he said that the productivity came down to 22% with the Lok Sabha functioning for a total of 21 hours. Now, largely it is the protest led by opposition parties and opposition leaders over lack of discussion on Pegasus and the farm laws that have been credited for these disruptions, or what is called as creating ruckus. What do you have to say to that?
Well, as the presiding officer of the Lok Sabha, Speaker Om Birla is fairly justified in articulating that anguish. But unfortunately, Mr. Birla was not a member of parliament from 2009 to 14, when these honorable traditions that disruption is a legitimate parliamentary tactic were consecrated in stone by the NDA BJP. In fact, leader of opposition in the Rajya Sabha, late Shri Arun Jaitley, leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, late Sushma Swaraj, both of them between 2010 and 2014 articulated ad nauseum that disruption is a legitimate parliamentary tactic, and we do not want a talk out by indulging in a debate. We actually want action. So therefore, we were only holding the government to those standards which they had consecrated in stone, as I had mentioned earlier, that we did not want a talk out. And we wanted discussions on Pegasus with a reply by the Home Minister, an assurance that there would be a Supreme Court monitored inquiry into the flagrant assault on the right to privacy of citizens. We wanted that there should be a discussion on the ongoing farmers' agitation, which has been holding the field for 9 months now, and it's a long drawn, protracted agitation. As also, we wanted accountability for the complete mismanagement of COVID-19. But unfortunately, the government behaved in the most cussed manner possible. And coupled with that, you had a situation where this shamelessly and brazenly just railroaded legislation through, an important legislation which has a bearing on the future of this country, on the future of our children, without any debate or discussion.
Right, you're right. Over 20 bills were passed in the Lok Sabha despite all these disruptions. What do you have to say about these rapid passing of bills? Do you think in the long run it is healthy for the democracy? Do you think the protests may in some sense have backfired because it made passing of these bills so much more easier?
Well, I am a firm believer, and I've always believed that Parliament must function. That non-functional legislatures are of no use to this country. In fact, last Saturday, I wrote a rather long piece in one of the newspapers about the complete redundancy of Parliament and legislative assemblies as instruments to hold government accountable. When the budget session was on, one day I had gone to see the Honorable Speaker, Mr. Piyush Goyal, who is now the leader of the BJP in the Rajya Sabha, was also present. And so I had suggested it to the Honorable Speaker that, look, one way of getting the House to run smoothly is that you have government business from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. in the evening. After the government business, if you table a 193 discussion every day, or let's say every alternate day, on a choice, on a subject which has been jointly decided by the opposition between 6 and 9 o'clock at night, right? Parliament will function smoothly. There would be no disruption. So, unfortunately, Mr. Piyush Goyal was not very enthusiastic about the idea. So, therefore, Parliament cannot function only on government's terms. You see, it's a multi stakeholder institution, and every stakeholder needs to walk that extra mile. Unfortunately, the NDA BJP government thinks that it is my way or the highway. And so, therefore, they decided to take the highway in this particular session, whereby uh, they just railroaded all these bills through, and these bills have huge implications for the future of India. For example, the factoring bill, which has been passed and which is, let's say, considered to be the most inconsequential bill, it is going to allow hundreds and thousands of NBFCs to indulge in something called bill discounting. Now, does the Reserve Bank of India have the infrastructure and the wherewithal to be really able to police these so many thousands of NBFCs who are now going to enter into the field of bill discounting when there were only 7 or 8 entities who were doing it earlier? So, and similarly, I can chapter and verse relate the implications of some of the other legislation passed. For example, the Essential Defense Services Bill. Now, this is a flagrant assault on the freedom of association, which is contained in Article 19 of the Constitution. And it is not even the reasonable restrictions which that article is subject to. It goes much beyond that. You've taken away very hard won workers' rights to be able to organize and agitate for their livelihood, for their rights, by just declaring these industries as sensitive and saying that anybody who goes on strike will be put behind bars for 5 years. Now, this is a complete breach of civil liberties as it stands constitutionally constituted in this country. And so, therefore, uh, from in many senses of the word, this in session has been a disappointment, and my trepidation and apprehension is that there would be serious implications of these legislations which have been passed.
Sure. You referred to that article that you written in the Indian Express, and I'd like to actually quote from it for our viewers. You've written, does India need such a parliament or even legislative assemblies? Thousands of crores are spent on election cycles every year. Towards what end? India can very well function with a directly elected executive and a judiciary to exercise oversight. The legislature has completely failed to hold the government accountable. Now, you have been elected to the parliament in the past, you have been in politics for several decades, you've also been a union minister. For someone like you to be expressing this kind of rather raw disappointment in the parliament, what does the road ahead look like? How do we recover from it?
Look, you can divide the Indian parliament into two distinct phases. From 1946 onwards, when the Constituent Assembly was constituted, till 1985, when the 10th schedule of the Constitution of India was legislated. Between 1946 and 1985, members of parliament knew that they had a vote which counted. They could hold the government accountable, even if you were a part of the ruling party. And there are many instances where governments and Congress governments were held accountable by their own members. I mean, the most famous instance I've quoted in the article itself is of Mr. Feroz Gandhi in 1950s, who held the Nehru government accountable for various acts of alleged omission and commission. But 1985 and the 10th schedule changed all that. Legislated with the right intention of ensuring that no horse trading takes place. It has not been able to deliver on that mandate, because with the amendment to the 10th schedule in 2000 and 2003, when the Vajpayee government was in office, you've only ended up raising the bar for defections from retail to wholesale. Earlier, you needed 1/3 to split a political party. Now you need 2/3. And still, you find that how governments have been toppled. 9 opposition governments have been toppled by very unconstitutional means in the past 7 years. But on the other hand, this whip driven tyranny has totally sucked out democracy from your legislative institutions. No longer can members of parliament vote according to their conscience, constituency, or common sense.
You mean across party lines?
Across party lines. This is, and I'm talking of a serious conceptual question out here. And the question which I had posed in that article, which needs to be answered at some point in time, that when we adopted universal adult suffrage, the founders of the Indian Constitution, or the framers of the Indian Constitutions, certainly did not envisage a situation whereby elective choice or the choice to elect somebody would lie in the hands of the electorate, but political power would reside in the hands of the party. So therefore, in fact, to my mind, this seems to be a flagrant violation of even the basic structure of the Constitution. But unfortunately, because this whole system of whips makes it extremely comfortable for party managers across party lines to be able to manage the flock. So therefore, this is something which everybody is very comfortable with and is unwilling to even talk about.
You think the system of whips should be done away with?
Well, in the sense, I had moved a private members bill in 2012, and then again in 2019, I have moved it, whereby I have said that you need to free up the legislative space, and the whip should only apply to no confidence motions, to adjournment motions, to money bills, and to financial matters where the stability of the government gets impacted. Right, the rest of the legislative space, even if the party was to issue a whip and you were to violate the whip, it should not result in your automatic disqualification or a petition being moved for your disqualification. So essentially, you have completely emasculated Parliament. And if the 10th schedule continues in its current form, I am afraid India will never be a true democracy again.
Sorry. Now, several opposition leaders, such as yourself, had been demanding that Pegasus be discussed in the parliament. Rahul Gandhi, Congress leader, outside of parliament, in various statements that he gave to the media, he said that the parliament, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha are the ideal platforms where something like this needs to be discussed, something that pertains to national security and that has something to do with every citizen's right to privacy. Now that that hasn't happened, there was also speculation that there will be some mock parliament of sorts. What do you think going ahead can be a reasonable way for opposition parties to communicate issues like these? Like you said, they haven't been discussed in the parliament. And how integral a role do you think opposition unity plays in such an equation?
Well, Fatima, I am constrained not to comment on the Pegasus matter. And the reason is that I am counsel for Mr. Yashwant Sinha and the Rashtra Manch in the Pegasus matter before the Supreme Court. And just yesterday, the Honorable Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, advised all counsels and petitioners that since the matter is before them and it is under consideration, so therefore whatever needs to be said should be said in court. So as much as I would have loved to answer the Pegasus question, given the fact that I am an officer of the court in a different hat that I wear, I'm afraid will not be able to answer this question, and I hope you do understand my constraints.
Sure. Now, I also had to ask you this question pertaining to this very important birthday dinner that took place a couple of days ago. Kapil Sibal, he held this rather important, politically important birthday dinner where he invited leaders from across party lines, across opposition parties. You would name it, and all the important figures that you could think of were present in that birthday dinner. This was seen as a move towards forging a greater opposition unity of sorts. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Do you think opposition unity right now is where the Congress party party and its importance lies, or do you think that it is the only way to counter the BJP going ahead before the 2024 polls?
Well, the Supreme Court has held the right to privacy to be a fundamental right. And as much as I respect my own right of privacy, I also respect Mr. Sibbal's right of privacy, because, after all, this was a private dinner which he had hosted. And I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment about what happened at the dinner. But to address the substance of your question, the fact remains that the index of opposition unity is a sine qua non if you want to defeat the NDA BJP. So, therefore, the ideal situation for the combined opposition, if it believes that the idea of India as it stands constituted by the founding fathers of the republic is under a grave threat, is to try and aspire for a situation whereby there's a direct one-on-one contest between the NDA BJP and the opposition. So, therefore, that is a desirable goal to work towards for 2024. And since we are still 33 months from the next Lok Sabha elections, I guess that there is enough time which is available to be able to work out these mechanics.
Sure. And when you talk about opposition unity, how important does Congress's revival, which is talked about on and off, how important do you think it lies at the center of it? Because it's often been said that if there is to be an opposition, a united opposition, it is only the Congress party that can lead it, as one of the bigger national parties who have been at the center in power for decades. And do you think 1 year since you and several other leaders within the Congress raised concerns over lack of full-time and effective leadership of the Congress party, do you think some progress has been made on that end?
Look, you asked two different questions, and let me split them up and answer them. First
Sure.
of all, insofar as the role of the Congress in this larger pantheon of opposition unity is concerned, if I remember correctly from the top of my head, there are about 220 odd seats where there's a direct fight between the Congress and the BJP across the country. And so, therefore, that leaves you with about, let's say, 300 odd seats or 320 odd seats, where the Congress is also a player and the other regional parties are also players. So, under those circumstances, the Congress obviously has a pole position in terms of this entire conception of opposition unity. Number two, with regard to the internal dynamics of the Congress party, the fact is that a large number of people, have been concerned, primarily because we lost the 2014 elections and 2019 elections. And keeping that template in mind and extrapolating from there, there is a strong case that only a robust, only integrated, only a fully revitalized Indian National Congress would be able to be in the vanguard of the opposition's charge to really resuscitate the idea of India, which has received a huge battering in the past 7 years.
And do you think there has been some progress on that front?
Well, in the sense, as I said, that the first 2 months, 2 years of any government are really an extended honeymoon period, and the NDA BJP, fortunately for them, has been in an extended honeymoon for the past 7 years, even from a governance paradigm. And unfortunately, they've squandered that away completely. I mean, the kind of very low crude oil prices, the kind of economy which was handed over by the UPA government to them were all very big pluses which they could have built upon. But unfortunately, there has been a squandering of that process. And that's why you see great economic distress all across the country, which predates COVID-19. You see mismanagement of national security, notwithstanding that there may be some good news with regard to China in Eastern Ladakh. But the fact is that on all parameters, the NDA BJP government has been a failure. But obviously, since they won in 2019 for the first 24 odd months, a new government has wind under its sails. So I really would not want to sort of extrapolate or see things in a perspective of year on year, or suffice to say that 2024 is the goal and we should work towards it.
Sure. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you.